This is Erica with Launching Legacies. Welcome to our daily devotional. Today we are going to continue our devotional series on spiritual giftings, and we're looking at the gifts of pastorship and leadership. So let's get started. The gifts of pastorship in particular, and also it's called shepherding, is actually a gift. And people may think, oh, it's a title, but I want to say something really briefly before I even read the definition, that pastorship really starts in a person's heart. And you can see them gifted with the desire to shepherd people before they get a title or a position in shepherding. And there are certain distinctions that need to be understood about a pastor. A person just doesn't jump into a pastorship, right? They become seasoned in that, but their heart really seems to become conditioned in it. And as a person who's been in ministry for a long time, and I've watched a lot of different churches and sat under a lot of different pastors or shepherds, you can tell those who their heart was turned towards pastoring and shepherding. Like, that is the nature of what they do, and they definitely embody this definition because of a gifting. And you can tell those who just got a job as a pastor. And like I said, the two are not equal. Some people get the job without the gifting, and some people have the gifting and don't have the job or title. But it's important that we understand that pastoring and shepherding is indeed a spiritual gift, and it should be understood as such because it's a divine strength and ability that's going to come to a person. So let's find out more about that divine strength and ability. The gift of pastoring or shepherding is the divine strength or ability to care for the personal needs of others by nurturing and mending life issues. Okay, and so maybe some people may think, oh, well, no, I thought that it was this, that, or the other. But no, a pastor really does care for the needs of people and shepherds them, puts them in the right direction, helps them mend their life issues. They're bringing them through the life process as the shepherd or pastor. Today, we're going to read a passage from John 10, 1 through 18, where is Jesus talking about being the good shepherd. And he sets the model for the over shepherd, and then pastors and shepherds with the gift of shepherding and pastoring are called under shepherds. They're not the main shepherd. And so as we reference this, I want you to remember that Jesus is referring to himself as the good shepherd, as the over shepherd. But if a person has the gift of shepherding or pastoring, they will be exemplifying the behaviors that Jesus talks about in this passage. In other words, they are to model after Jesus as a under shepherd and doing things that are similar to how he does it, especially with that same character. And so we can look at John 10, 1 through 18, We can also look at Ephesians 4, 11 through 14, 1 Timothy 3, 1 through 7, and 1 Peter 5, 1 through 3. You'll notice that for the 1 Timothy passage, we'll be using that one for leadership because the terminology in different translations yields itself to both pastoring, shepherding, and leadership. But we want to look at the model for a shepherd because a pastor is definitely a shepherd, caring for the needs of the flock. So let's look here at this passage. So we're in John 10, John 10, and we're going to start at verse 14. Verse 11. And it says, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd sacrifices his life for the sheep. And a hired hand will run when he sees a wolf coming. He will abandon the sheep because they don't belong to him and he isn't their shepherd. And so the wolf attacks them and scatters the flock. The hired hand runs away because he's working only for the money and doesn't really care about the sheep. And it says, I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep, my own sheep, and they know me, just as my Father knows me, and I know the Father. So I sacrifice my life for the sheep. I have other sheep too, and I want to bring them into the flock. I must bring them also, and I'm going to stop right there. So, and I stopped at the B clause of verse 16. But so what do we get here? There's a definite part you want to read, and he's talking about the sheep gate and how he is the sheep gate and that no one comes in to the fold without coming through Christ. Okay. But then he talks about there's a thief that wants to get in to steal, kill, and destroy the lives of the sheep. And so the shepherd if he's a good shepherd, he sacrifices his life for the sheep. He stands there in the place of the sheep. We know that pastors give account for the souls that they care for. So when this is all said and done, if we go to judgment and we have to give account for the things that we've done in this world, if a person receives the position of a pastor, because hopefully they have the gift of a pastor, they're going to give account. They're gonna stand and say, this is what I did and this is what happened. And for the souls that were lost because they were negligent or are doing the wrong thing or didn't preach the right messages or didn't try to lead the sheep in the right directions, if they were greedy and wanted to make a profit off of the flock and weren't trying to really help the flock because of this, they didn't really care about them. If they did not operate in the true gifting of a shepherd or a pastor, if they didn't operate in that way and they were careless with the lives of others, they'll give account for that. And so really it's very similar to what they're talking about here for Jesus. He says, look, I gave up my life. Yeah. And these shepherds, if they're doing the true shepherding with this gift, the gift of shepherding and pastoring, will also be giving up their lives. Literally, they'll be caring for this flock, wanting their flock to be nourished, wanting them to be safe, keeping the wolves out of the flock, right? They're not going to let people come in and just ravish the flock and take whatever they want. They're going to be providing care and guidance and nurturing for their flock. That is the work of a shepherd, to be like the good shepherd, even though they're under shepherds. And so this is a big job. It's a big undertaking. And so I really want us to make sure that we give credence to that. If you are working with a pastor, if you're working under a pastor and they have the gift of pastorship and shepherding, you need to remember how much of a work this is in them. It's a spiritual gifting, yes, but then how much is called upon them to operate in that gifting on a continual basis. It's a lot. And that's why people shouldn't be taking titles without knowing that they're really gifted to do the work. You need to be gifted to do this service. All right, let's move on from pastorship, shepherding, to leadership, which again, most shepherds, pastors will have gifts in leadership, right? Because leadership is another part of the shepherding, pastoring role that is usually called upon people. And so the gift of leadership, and I want to make a distinction between leadership and administration. Okay, leadership has to do with people and administration has to do with systems and things. So in some of the passages, we see them interchanged because of the translation, different translations. But administration it has to do with organizing tasks, groups of people to accomplish certain tasks. It's towards task orientation. And leadership, so that becomes a system. Systems work for a task. They work for a different direction. Leadership, though, is distinct because it says that the leadership is the divine strength or ability to influence people at their level while directing and focusing them on the big picture, vision, or idea. Okay. And so what is this? The leader drives the vision. They bring the person into the big picture, into the big idea, helping them to go into a certain area. So kind of in a roundabout sense, it's kind of like how the shepherd kind of leads them in one way or another, after they've been led by God, right? So the leader needs to be led by God, and then they can help lead or influence the people while directing them and focusing them on the big picture. So making sure they're staying on track, making sure they're staying in the right area. And so we're going to look at a passage, 1 Timothy 3, and I'm reading the New Living Translation, and I'm going to tell you that because in some translations, the word is that they use is church leader. Sometimes it's used bishop. Sometimes it's used, it's not really used pastor in any translation that I've been reading. You have to read through various translations, but a lot of times it's used bishop. And so they start with these qualifications for the position of, needs to be. So I'm sorry, 1 Timothy 3, and I'm kind of going to skip through a little bit. It's 1 Timothy 3, starting with verse 1. And so, they need to be, it's an honorable position. So it says, this is a trustworthy saying. If someone aspires to be a church leader, he desires an honorable position. Okay, so it talks about the position. And then 2, it says, so a church leader must be a man whose life is above reproach. He must be faithful to his wife. He must exercise self-control, live wisely, and have good good reputation. He must enjoy having guests in his home, and he must be able to teach. He must not be a heavy drinker or be violent. He must be gentle, not quarrelsome, and not love money. He must manage his own family well, having children who respect and obey him. For if a man cannot manage his own household, how can he take care of God's church? Okay. And so it kind of gives us a setting for it. Now, to this point, we're just talking about somebody who has good character. Let's just be straightforward. Every man should be having only one wife. Okay. Every man should be devoted to their household. Every man should have children that respect them. So we're really just saying this person should have good character. That's not necessarily fully of the gifting. This is just about the character. You need to be, if you're leading in the church, you need to have all these things under your belt anyhow, because it's what God would ask of us. Not doing all these, being quarrelsome and fighting and having these problems. That's not acceptable. Moving forward in verse 6, it says a church leader must not be a new believer, because he might become proud and the devil could cause him to fall. Also, people outside the church must speak well of him, and also be will not be disgraced and fall into the devil's trap. Okay, and so then we find this, the end of the passage is also talking about the leader's ability to be well known in the community. People speak well of him. People outside the church speak well of him, but he's not a new believer. Why? Because as a new believer, you're learning to understand Christ. You're learning to walk with Christ. As you get more seasoned, you're understanding vision and purpose and drive and direction, and you need to be able to bring people into that way. If a person has the gift of leadership, then they're able to bring people into a vision, a purpose, a direction or area, right? And they're able to kind of help people correct and bring them into the right area. As a leader, you can't do that if you have so many problems in life that you are not functional, that people don't even trust you, or they speak unkind things about your character and your behavior. If you're quarrelsome and always fighting with people, if you're going off the handle and having some issues, you are not likely operating in the gifting of leadership, and that should be reevaluated. Something is wrong. Something is broken. And so what he's saying, what the passage is saying here in 1 Timothy is understanding that a church leader, people operating in the gift of leadership, have this ability to guide people and lead people. But in that ability, there needs to be an earnestness of character. There needs to be a good standing and good position as a person in leadership. And that needs to be pretty clear. So what is the distinction here? A pastor, shepherd definitely should have giftings in leadership. That's important because they need to move the people towards a vision of what God is telling them to do as a pastor and shepherd. But a leader is not always a pastor. Okay, they're not always a shepherd. So there are church leaders who operate in leadership who are not pastors, and they are not giving account for the souls of these people. They're not shepherding them and shepherding their life and helping them to recover and overcome life's issues. There are people who work in leadership that they just don't. That's not what they do. And so we need to make a clear distinction. And then there's also people who have titles of leadership and who are not leaders. They really don't have the qualifications according to this passage, but also don't have the ability to actually lead people towards a vision or direction from divine strength and ability from God. And so we want to be mindful of these things. I know I've been a bit long today because there's a lot of details in these passages, but we want to be mindful that people with the gifts of leadership and pastorship or shepherding really do have a large burden. And so we want you to know that we're praying for you. If you're operating in these gifts, and particularly if you're operating in the gifts and in a position that allows you to use these gifts, we're praying for you. We're praying for all of you that you would heal, live, and grow. And we hope that you're praying for us. We want to invite you to our events that are coming up in March. Please go to our Facebook page and you can see some of those events. And we also want to encourage you to join us again tomorrow for another of our devotionals as we continue this series on spiritual gifting. Until then, be blessed.